Hello, and welcome to the hashtag Story First podcast. My name is Devin Sawyer, and I am joined by my esteemed co-host and co-founder and colleague, Barry Donaldson, aka Crayons. Barry, say hello.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening.
Together, we represent Story Prima, which is a decentralized autonomous organization with a mission to accelerate the growth and success of story-focused NFT projects through media research, education, and project incubation. Today on Story First, we welcome Blaise and Bryce from the runner community. Omega Runner X is a new Web3 comic coming soon with a really deep world and a very strong focus on story and community. We're really excited to talk about this project, so let's get started. Blaise, tell us your origin story. How did you get into Web3 and what's your role in the project?
First of all, thanks for having us. Really psyched to be here. Really psyched to talk story because I'm a story geek. My background is I grew up in Vermont, went to college, started playwriting, went to New York, did a little acting and playwriting, and then found myself really loving writing. This is, back in the late 90s, early aughts. Came to Los Angeles in 2001 and was an aspiring screenwriter, eventually becoming a paid screenwriter in about 2007. Worked at Disney for a long stretch, had an overall deal there. Was invited by John Lasseter to join Disney Animation, which is what he was running there at the time, and got involved in the Story Trust right when Tangled was coming out. So I was there for, on the Story Trust for Tangled, Frozen, Big Hero 6. God, what else was there? A bunch of stuff at that time. Zootopia, Wreck-It Ralph. Thank you. So it was an incredible run, incredible experience. And then I left Disney. We tried to relaunch Paramount Animation. So I was involved over there as both a writer and a director. I've written movies like Vampires versus the Bronx, Netflix, which Lorne Michaels produced and was a lot of SNL crew. Oz Rodriguez directed that. I wrote Clifford the Big Red Dog, the adaptation for Paramount, and a bunch of other stuff. A lot of what you do as a screenwriter is going in and fixing broken movies, either right before they shoot, while they're shooting, or after they shoot. So that was a big part of my life. And I was some of the people I would collaborate with periodically were Brian Unclis, who's a producer in Hollywood, and Bryce, who's joining me on the podcast. And we're always talking about ways to do things or projects to work on together. And we started batting around this idea called Runner, not really knowing how it would live, a TV series, a movie, not sure, just like building out a whole universe from the ground up. And it really was Bryce's brand to bring it into the Web3 space. And my first question was, what the fuck is Web3? And so I had to be educated. I really only knew about it peripherally. So when my way in was the my co-guest here, so maybe this is a perfect time for him to take over.
Great segue. Bryce, what's your origin story? And then let's hear about the project and in the context of Runner and Web3.
Yeah, of course. Again, to reiterate, thanks for having us. It's always happy to talk to people, especially people who are really focused on bringing narrative to Web3. It's something I've been really passionate about for the last year. My origin is, a lot like a lot of people in the film industry. I grew up doing a lot of theater. I came out to Los Angeles. I went to film school. I came out to Los Angeles knowing I wanted to work in movies. I spent 2 years at United Talent Agency working with writers and directors. From there, I went to go work in the creative group over at Warner Brothers on the feature side. I was there for about a year and a half, and then went to go work for Brian Unclis, coming off the Hunger Games. And we founded a new company called Clubhouse Pictures. And we had a great run with Club.
Is that my side or we lost Bryce audio?
Yeah, Bryce, we got no audio, buddy.
I just lost audio for some reason.
Oh, you're back.
You're back now. You're back.
Okay.
Now.
You pick it up
Where'd you lose me?
Clubhouse. Pick it up from
Okay.
We launched Clubhouse Pictures.
Yeah, so we launched Clubhouse Pictures back in 2015, and we've had a great run there. One of the first things we did is we took a movie called Bright with Will Smith, and we sold that to Netflix back before Netflix was cool. That was the first major blockbuster ever done there. We had, for a long time, we had the distinction of being the most expensive and least expensive projects ever done at Netflix. We had both. We've done a huge run of projects over there. We did Project Power with Fox. We did Kate with Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Woody Harrelson, and Cedric Nicholas Troyan, who's our director on Runner. We did a movie called Along for the Ride with the Sarah Dessen team. We got a movie coming out with Lily Reinhart later this year. So we've had a lot of success over there. Outside that, we've done a lot of work with Margot Robbie. We did I, Tonya pretty early on in the company, and then went from there and worked with her on a Hulu series called Dollface, and then also on Birds of Prey for DC Films and Warner Brothers. And while I was doing all of this, while I was, becoming a film producer, I've been trading crypto since 2013. Just sort of on the side. I've always loved to just, make investments and things like that. And I spent a lot of time on the internet. I would consider myself very online. And it was like early 2021 when I saw the Beeple sale. And when I saw that happen, I went, I kind of knew what Top Shot was, but I'm not a basketball person. And so I hadn't really paid attention to it. I saw the Beeple sale and was like, wait a second, art is coming to blockchain. And I think my experience having traded crypto so much made it a very easy access point for me to understand NFTs pretty early. And I started trading things on like Nifty Gateway early on. And I was just right place, right time, in the Bored Ape Yacht Club day one. And have really gotten to see how that changed online communities, right? And how this thing that I've loved for so long, which is fandom, online community, online kind of culture, has jumped into the Web3. And I think I spent most of the summer 2021 waiting for that project to come along that was going to merge storytelling, like real storytelling, the way I knew it in Hollywood, and the Web3 culture, because there's so much potential for those two things to interact. And I kind of sat back and I was waiting for it. And I've looked at a lot of projects that have really kind of pushed the ball forward in this way, but none of them quite hit the center of the target the way I wanted it to. And it was sometime around August or so, September, when I was talking about this with Brian, and he was just like, well, what does it look like? Like, what does it look like in the perfect world? What does this project look like if you bring something to Web3 with story? And I was like, well, it kind of looks like Runner, right? It kind of looks like this thing that we've been talking about for a year that we don't really know where it lives yet. But it's like, can we take that story and that universe and that world that we built and translate it to Web3? Because it really lives there. And I think, we talked about it with Cedric and with Blaise, and we started figuring it out. And it was one of those, like, you have a great story when the moment you try to change it to a medium, everything still works. And in some ways it fits better there than it did where it lived before. And I think as we started building out not just what the story was, but how we introduce people to the story, which in our case is like we're starting with a comic book that is the lead in, becomes an allow less pass to a PFP project. And from there, it will spin out all kinds of other like tertiary media. And the more we started building that system out, the more natural it felt kind of as a fit for the project and the market. And I think, that was a really kind of exciting moment because it was watching these two worlds that I've been part of for so long kind of slowly collide. And it's been really, really fun.
I'd love to pull on that string. Tell us about what is it? What is it in that fit for you? How can you describe that to the audience?
Some of it is thematic, right? Some of it's thematic in that, Blaise, I should really let you pitch the story. Maybe I'll kick it off.
No, that's cool. We can talk.
Let's start with the story, man.
Yeah, story first. The story prima. So the idea is basically Cedric and Bryce and Brian were working on a film called Kate that Bryce talked about before at Netflix, and they were all over the world, Japan, and where else were you guys? You guys were everywhere on that thing.
Thailand.
Thailand. Filming it. Bryce and Cedric started batting around this idea about something involving cars, maybe futuristic racing. And Cedric was like, who's French, and I'm not going to attempt to do his accent, but it's very cool. You should definitely have him on the show because he's a wild and fun guest. He came up with this notion of, perhaps there could be these wormholes that you could use in the course of the race. Maybe you project forward 100 or 1,000 meters, maybe 100 kilometers in the course of the race. And that's kind of what they brought to me. And I had developed, in my time at Disney, I developed a futuristic racing movie. And because John Lasseter was so hardcore about research, I had to learn how to go to race cars. I went to F1 races. I went to all kinds of races. I got behind the wheel of an Indy 3 car and learned how to drive one. So I spoke to drivers. I learned about the Dakar rally. So I had all this information about races, but the challenge in storytelling with races is essentially the stakes are kind of low. I mean, you can give a character a lot to why it matters to them, but it was always a struggle when you're doing a racing movie. So I was like, well, let's build this thing from the bottom, start with nothing and give it the maximum amount of stakes. And that started with inventing a new planet called Omega, where unlike Earth culture, where all cultures, basically every culture on Earth is essentially a warrior culture. Whoever's the most kick-ass gets to kill and then be in charge and then kill the neighboring. And that's basically how it works today. I was like, what if instead of that, what if the currency of power on this planet was speed, right? So whoever was the fastest at a most fundamental level in your tribe, whoever's the fastest in their tribe becomes the chieftain of that tribe. And then take that to the nth degree over 20,000 years of human evolution. What does that look like? And even though the leader of these tribes would be called a runner, as the fastest runner, what happens when that evolves to horseback riding, to steam, to sail, et cetera, all the way to these futuristic racers. And of course, as you guys know, especially in America, in the West, we put so much money and technology and research into blowing each other up. What's the most effective way to kill one another? Well, what if we had invested all that time and effort into going as fast as humanly possible? Because that's the most important thing. And what if, in addition to it giving you power in your nation, there is also an Omega sovereign, a sovereign over all of these worlds, who wins one 21-day grueling race called the Omega race that occurs every cycle, which is essentially 800 Earth days. And they are the top dog of this world by being the fastest. So that was sort of the notion. I'm like, well, the stakes couldn't be fucking higher than that, because obviously an oppressive stuff and be on top. And the only way to take them out is to race. And so then I looped back in Cedric's idea about these wormholes. I'm like, okay, what if we had these things that we called pinches? And basically you had your pilot, your runner inside of this high-tech futuristic racing vehicle, and next to them sat a pincher. The pincher's job was to open up a wormhole that the driver would then have to thread. Now, if you don't thread it perfectly, you could die, or it does incredible damage to your vehicle because you're sliding through this thing depending on how far it is. And the pinched, Bryce, of course, always thinking Web3, immediately was like, oh, fuck. Okay, so you have these underdogs that are willing to take this incredible.
On the Underdog.
I know.
Yeah.
You froze on the Underdog, Blaise.
Sorry.
Underdog, cut.
Gotcha. Am I stable now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so Bryce immediately identifies a Web3 parallel with the pinch, where you have these underdogs that are put upon that want to flip, basically the power structure on this planet. So they are willing to work in a more dangerous sort of parallel way by threading these pinches. And that's kind of the great equalizer in the race. And to all about technology and how technology can be the thing that allows put upon marginalized people to get a voice and to get power. And it's the same thing that later a corporation may, or a person in power may use to oppress them. So that was sort of I think, and Bryce, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that to me seemed off the bat, with that punk rock element and with the pinch element, the first thing that identified as a Web3 parallel.
It was the high risk, high reward piece of the narrative that I think really drew me into crypto, because I feel like the people that I know in crypto, and especially the people that I've known in crypto for a really long time, kind of coming up when you're throwing, $100 into Bitcoin in 2013 kind of thing. It's you're doing that because, maybe that $100 blows up and becomes nothing, but putting $100 into Amazon stock is not going to change your life, right? It's just not going to do it. So there's sort of like this idea that you had to be broke enough at that time that investing in crypto seemed like a good idea, because it was like, well, if you're going to roll the dice hard. And I think there was a real identification there with Ozzy and with these characters that are under the thumb of the Avalonian Union. And it really felt like there was this sort of this ethos to the technology within the story that really mirrored the technology and the community that exists in real life. And, you know, moments like that, when they happen, when you're building stories and then you figure out this sort of synergy between the story and the medium and the real world you're telling, are kind of those signposts that let you know that you're in the right track, because then it allows you to create a story that's about something, but then it's about more than what it's just about. And I think that's the key to building narrative that has longevity, is that it has to have meaning to the community that is ingesting it.
Mm-hmm.
There is another stories. Oh, sorry, Blaise.
Oh, no, it's quite all right. I was just going to echo on that. Again, I don't want to say that I really did not understand this world going into it, the world of Web3. And it was really Bryce that brought me in. And the more I learned, and the more I sort of like started taking a look at these different communities and how story was kind of happening in real time on social platforms and in Discord, and like people riffing on ideas, I was like, oh, this is perfect, because we are building an entire world. Like, we're building a universe, and yeah, we can tell a select amount of stories in that space, but there are infinite stories to tell. And the comp that I sometimes use is like, you know, I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up loving Star Wars. And, you know, like, you'd have like your Lukes and your Darth and your Leia and your Han, of course. But then those peripheral characters that were on screen for 2 seconds in a fucking cantina, you could buy that figure. And even like the bounty hunters that they alluded to, they gave you a little bit of a taste, but we didn't even really know much about Boba Fett. So you had to invent these stories and invent these histories. So the thing that got me excited, I was like, oh, wow, like our community can take these characters that are maybe on the periphery and that fit into the larger fabric of maybe our story that we're telling, but maybe an entire different parallel story. Maybe they want to tell stories about like street racing on the slums of Corin, you know, which has its own sort of like subculture and reward. Maybe those people want nothing to do with the bigger race to control a whole nation. And that's where I was like, oh my God, this can live at multiple levels. And not only can this story be told in the Web3 space, but it must be told in the Web3 space, the more I came to understand it. So that was a very long-winded answer to your question. Hopefully we hit like some target.
The parallel hits, right? For sure. Like, we love it. You know, we love stories in Web3, projects that are focused on stories in Web3, but what we really love, because it's much like what got us into the space with our invention of Legends of Cypher, is stories with big universe that are trying to talk about what Web3 ethos is about, which is kind of flip the power on its head and give some of it back to those, and what risks you might need to take to enter this world to try and frankly change the existing power structures. So I love the idea of, you know, threading the pinch, if you will, as a way to kind of think about changing the narrative of the game through the race, where you could literally say, no longer in charge. I mean, that at the end of the day, when you go all the way back to read the Bitcoin white paper, and you kind of read Satoshi's description, it's like to move money without the need for a bank.
Yeah,
that's a pretty big deal, right? No, love it. Awesome. Barry, I'm sure you've got some questions.
Yeah. I was doing some research on you guys before this meeting. And Blaise, I saw an article on Medium, an interview, and you talked about how you came up with basically, so on your world, instead of warrior culture, speed culture. And so then everything stems from that. But what that really talks to or speaks to is consistency of the world you're inventing. And I think that's something that's often overlooked in stories, right? I remember I took a lecture once, and it talked about Gabriel Garcia Marquez in like 100 Years of Solitude and the old man with enormous wings. Yeah. And it's like you have your audience for whatever medium of storytelling, right? It doesn't matter if it's a movie or a book or whatever. And you set the conditions for that world. And maybe it happens that there's this man washes up one day with giant ratty wings. And it's like, well, okay, the audience will accept that. And then you just move forward. but you have to be consistent in that storytelling, right? You can't you can have whatever rules you want to start with, but then you have to maintain those rules. Because people aren't stupid, right? They'll see like the logical flaws and they'll poke holes in whatever it is you're doing. And I'm curious. So you're doing that. So like I'm the head writer for our project. And so I keep that in mind a lot. And I see you guys talking about this, and I'm curious how you kind of keep that idea of consistency. How do you maintain the consistency when you're working with a bunch of people and then you're going to involve your community? I think that's very difficult. It's hard enough for one person, but then you involve more than one, dozens or hundreds.
Yeah, it's a great question. I was thinking 100 Years of Solitude as well. It's like, you're like, well, magic exists in this world and here we go. We're off to the races, you know?
Oh God,
crazy
it's
things,
so confusing.
crazy things can happen. What an incredible read. So as it pertains to this, it really, Bryce and Brian are incredible collaborators, but, creatively speaking, it's Cedric and me are sort of like the two-headed monster, for lack of a better word, that is at the heart of this thing. So when you talk about consistency, we're building out these various cultures, right? The cultures are informed by the climates, like, basically starting with the premise, like speed is power, right? But we have climates that we have people that exist in archipelagos. We have people that exist in the Arctic and subarctic, people that exist in deserts. So knowing those two factors, how does that inform their culture, their racing vehicles, their fashion, you name it. And Cedric and I, we're students of the world. We love to read all about all different sort of things and use that to inform ourselves as we build out this new world. So we'll sort of like start talking about, like, for example, there's a nation on Omega that's called Nasavia. Nasavia is made up of like 100 different islands. It's an island culture. And yes, they compete in the Omega race, but their vehicle is heavily informed by thousands of like catamaran racing culture. So even though their vehicle goes on land, it has that aesthetic, right? So because we know that like the racing evolution that they experienced is going to inform them as they translate to a larger race. So a lot of it comes from conversations about Cedric and I. I'll pitch out something narrative, something character-wise, and then he'll challenge me, and vice versa. And there'll be times where like Cedric will call me, right now he's in Paris, like he'll call me at 3 a.m. my time and be like, hey, so I'm thinking about the First Nations story for the culture of the Avalonian Union. And, and he'll start telling me this myth. And I'm like, bro, like you go so hard in the paint on this stuff. And I love it, and then so it becomes like a push back and forth on making sure that we're staying true to our central conceit. Speed is the currency of power. Speed is is at the end of the day, that is what you are after. And how does that inform things? Like, obviously, look, if you're talking about, gods of old, Greek gods, Norse gods, like we wouldn't have an Ares god of war, right? Hermes would be, we don't have a Hermes in this world, but obviously Hermes would probably be the most powerful and important god and would have temples built to them, he or her or they. So anyway, that to me is how we kind of keep it consistent. And it's Cedric and I just kind of going back and forth in this friendly debate, both in the trying to keep this world and this story in our best interests.
Yeah. And then just to elaborate on that a little bit, the next piece of it is really a management problem, because we've got the story trust in two people. And then we have, our full team with all the artists, and everybody comes out to about 45 right now. And I think, there's a lot that we learned in managing movie productions, because on a movie production, you'll start, like this in a little conversation of 2-3 people. And then in 3 months, you'll have 600 people on set, and you've got to make sure everybody's moving in the right direction. And we've learned a lot, having done that 8 or 9 times now as a company. There are good ways to convey creative goals. There are bad ways to convey creative goals. And then there are times where you have to give a little bit of control over to an artist, or a little bit of control over to a technical director, or whatever that is. And I think it becomes a massive management problem that, because we've been here before, we're pretty well set up to handle, but we're approaching this production the same way we would approach a film production.
So you've got your employees, right? Or coworkers, 40, 50 people. That's an issue. But then once you give you let this thing go into the world. The question is, how do you maintain enough control with the community to keep it kind of pointed in the right direction? Like, so when I write, I was just saying, like, when I write, I like to think of it as like dropping little breadcrumbs to try to, like, for the audience to try to kind of take them to where you're going, right? Because anybody that creates a project has some idea of where they want it to go for some reason. It's not all just magic 8-ball. But so how do you guys foresee doing that?
So one of the reasons we're launching with this comic book is because it allows us to kind of hold people's hands into one piece of our world, like one very sort of limited story. That's, you know, about these 8 characters. We call them, you know, our core community characters, because the idea is that this is the story that becomes sort of the background myth for the entire universe that we're building. Individuals will have their own profile pictures. They will have their own unique characters that they can go and invent for, right? And we've set up these rails so that people will have a certain idea of like where this character comes from and what that character might do. But beyond that, it's going to be really open to the creators or the owners of those characters if they want to go create something new or have that character participate in the narrative in some way. Like they can, of course, you know, throw ideas against the wall. And I think the hope is that you set up an interesting enough world that the community understands and the creators understand kind of what those bounds are, and they want to work within those bounds because they're interesting. But the other piece of it is if they want to create something that goes outside of those bounds, okay, how does that work? You know, like tell us, because I think it's one of the unique opportunities of Web3 is to have someone kind of take your work and throw it back at you. And how do you look at it and be like, oh, I never thought of it like that. You know, how does this function? I think one of the other things we talk about a lot is like we talk about comics and, you know, the world of Marvel or DC. And one of the things that makes these story universes so unique is that different people can come along in different decades and write the same character in vastly different timelines, different stories, different rules. And that's awesome. Right. And I think you just like, as creators, everyone's first instinct is to clamp down and say, no, it's like this, it's like that, it's like this. But if you actually, you know, open up a little bit and kind of allow that sort of creativity to happen, you can get things back that you never expected. And that's what we're really excited about here.
I'd love to stay on that for a little bit because, you know, that really brings the community aspect, right? And there's many variations to think about community, you know, fan-based community, fan fiction, an audience you sell to. You're talking about now getting into creative feedback in possibly to your direct storyline. And one of the things that we know Web3 provides through the NFT and cryptocurrency and kind of creating that frictionless economic environment, it allows your product to take on a very different form for the community that can incentivize through intellectual property ownership, licensing. Can you talk a little bit about how you're taking maybe tokenomics, NFT economics, and using that to engage the community? Are you going as far as co-creating with them? What are some of the limits you see on IP, at least from your vision today, and maybe talk about what you see possibly in the future?
Yeah, one of the things that's so interesting about Web3 and the way I like to think about it is I like to think about it as people building brands as a collective, right? It allows a fandom as it would normally exist on the internet to suddenly monetize itself, right? Because instead of simply being a fan of Harry Potter and building out this fan fiction universe that you actually don't have any real ownership over, suddenly you become an owner of a token, and now you have ownership in this token, and it's you know, it's worthwhile for you to put effort into this token, but it's also worthwhile for you to support other people who are putting other effort into their tokens to build out this entire universe. And I think that's something, you know, I get a lot of inspiration on this one from the Bored Ape Yacht Club. It's like nobody expected there to be a fast food restaurant around this, or a music label around this, or a fashion label around this. And yet all of those things now exist. And though I don't have any direct part in any of them, you know, I am vested in the success of all of those ventures. I would like all of them to work because that is part of this collective brand that I've become part of. And I think taking that and doing that inside of a story universe gives you these opportunities to create not only for your community, but create for the community beyond your community. And, naturally, I think the ones that are really good will rise to the top, will have a life of their own. Some of the ones that do not maybe have the same traction won't have that. And that's, part of the creative process and something you have to approach early. But I think it gives everyone this opportunity to create within a brand that is larger than what any one person could do alone. And I think that's the really exciting piece of Web3, is that we are all better in the long run having a small piece of control over a much larger pie than we would fully controlling our own tiny pies, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think, either one of you guys think that, this is kind of a leading question, do you think that the emotional buy-in from the fans is more important than the financial buy-in? Like if they feel strongly about it, like they hate the characters, they love the characters, it makes them cry, it makes them laugh, it's more important for the longevity of the project than maybe I can make a buck. I tend to think the emotions are more important, but you guys have done this more than I have, so.
Yeah, I'll speak first, and then Bryce, you go ahead. I think we're probably in sync. I can tell you, as somebody who's been building this out for 2 years, the gratification of seeing our growing community start to engage and have opinions on characters and nations and hints at storylines and already starting to pick sides, like, is far more that emotional investment is far more gratifying. I mean, look, we need, obviously I need enough money to survive. I'm not a fancy person. I don't want a fortune. That's not why I'm here. I can make a lot more money doing other shit, but I love this shit. And if I can't do anything else because this is what I wake up. This is what I go to bed thinking about. It's what I wake up thinking about. So this is all I want to do. So that gratification is everything. And of course we want enough money to finance growth, maintenance, all that stuff. But without question, like, I just want, that is what nourishes me more than anything else.
Yeah, I would reiterate that several times over. I also think the power of people who are committed to something because they love it is a lot of what I get out of NFTs. Like, yeah, there's that little piece of me that brought me to them as just like, oh, pure investment vehicle. Like, can I flip on sentiment? Like, that's kind of an interesting puzzle, but it grows boring after a couple of weeks. And then you get to this place, you're like, okay, what are the projects that I've really enjoyed? And I think about, moments entire communities come together for online competitions, or moments entire communities come together because something has happened in their community and it just becomes this like massive conversation piece and this meme sort of the weekend. And I think about things that have happened in the NFT space where that is so much fun for me, that you realize that the experience of holding that NFT and the experience of connecting with those community members, sometimes online, sometimes in real life, going to meetups in real life and meeting people from all over the country, all over the world who have this thing in common with you. That's this strange kind of obscure JPEG collection on the internet, is spectacular. And for me, it's like, that's the utility of NFTs. It's like, as a piece of entertainment itself, because owning it brings you into that world. And I like to think of NFTs that way. Of course, you want to take care of people financially, or you want people to, have a good experience financially, but it's like, you can only control that so much, but you can definitely control how people feel when they hold something. And that's, what we're focused on.
Love to know more. Like, tell the audience, for those of them that might be considering your project, to join as a fan, but what would the NFT experience look like? So you mentioned the PFP collection, comic coming soon. Maybe just give us sort of a linear description of how the product shapes as NFT for the community. What can they expect from it in the near term?
Yeah, the near term, we've got several iterations of the comic that are on their way. So the first one is serving as our allow list mint pass. The second one is in coloring right now. It's super exciting. Obviously, there'll be access for our holders. I think long term, we look at this as, my goal is to spin out a product like Pokemon, where it's a comic, it's a television show, it's a game, it's a video game, it's collectible merchandise, and it lives on in all of these mediums sort of simultaneously. Right? It's kind of hard to sit back and think about it and go like, oh, is that a TV show first? Is it a video game first? Like, where does that begin? And I think when I think about runner, I always say like my goal is to have a runner cereal box. And it's like, because if we can get to the cereal box, it means we have all these other things. And that's obviously long-term. I think short-term, bringing people in with the comic, getting people into the NFT, allowing people to explore this world and explore the story. And then I think there are natural evolutions in the world that we're thinking about. Obviously, it's all racing based. So a racing element, some kind of vehicle element, things like this are stuff that we can, we're definitely thinking about. I don't want to say too much, but I think the goal is to make it a very exciting experience as a holder, a very exciting experience as a consumer, and a very exciting experience in the short term and the long term.
And I think if you're immersed in this community and you start to make that investment and you start to understand story in the world, you will start to, the roadmap will appear to you without us even saying it. Like there's some very clear places for this to go. And we want to offer that experience to the fans as much as possible without, look, we don't want to make promises we can't keep as well. But one thing I can tell you is in terms of the comics and the issues, I have 100 laid out already just to tell the arc of this story of these 8 central characters that Bryce talked about before, making sure that we fulfill those arcs, that we see all these stories through. And the great thing about that narrative is it will explain the whole world and the history and give you a compelling narrative to follow. And then hopefully will give you enough data that you can then remix and tell the stories with your particular PFPs that intersect with that space.
I have a question for you guys. Have you given any thought to, so something I've been thinking about. So NFTs they're new, right? They're really pretty much just JPEGs that are scarce, provably scarce. Mm-hmm. There's some new functionality coming to them, but I am hopeful that in some number of years, there will exist NFTs that evolve over time while retaining their non-fungibility. They're still one of ones, but they change to show experience like a video game character. And I'm curious if you guys have given any thought to such things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of our long-term process is that, getting into the NFT gets you on the Genesis token that allows you full participation in where the story is going. There are obvious plans for a competitive element with the racing. We've been talking with I guess there's the first piece, which is, can you compete as your character? Can you use your character to gain experience and to level up, for instance? But also we've been talking with, we're working with Layer Zero that creates omni-chain projects. And so we're launching this on Ethereum, but it's also going to have its ability long-term to jump into other chains, natively jump into other chains. And that allows us to do all kinds of things with blockchain that aren't necessarily available to us on the main net, because you can do things where, for instance, if a transaction requires a few dozen transactions on the EVM chain, you're in a real problem with gas. But if you jump out to a cheaper chain, you can maybe build out games, build out functionality that can exist there, and then port back to Ethereum in a single transaction. And that's all being built into our product.
That sounds awesome. Cool. Yeah, we just totally crossed over there. Love it. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, that sort of puts the perspective back to your point around thematic fit with the story, right? That the kind of the ecosystem of blockchains coming to life with the way you might transport the world. Maybe there's parallels and chains in your universe. Really cool.
Absolutely. And you can thread the pinch over to Solana for a day.
Yeah, I love it. Okay. I get it. Now I really get it. Wow. Yeah. That's so cool. Cool. We're coming up on the hour and I want to be respectful of time. And because one of the key things that, are the community of Story Prima and folks learning how to do story-based projects, and the reason we started Story Prima was because the market is largely saturated by derivative projects. As great as some of the OGs are, CryptoPunks and Bored Apes and the success they've had, the derivative repeats have created a saturated market of noise where so much of the attention is on the speculative nature of the market. So it's harder to break through today, much harder than it was a year to a year and a half ago. So we love to learn from burgeoning projects, trying to figure out how do you create awareness when there's so much noise in the space, so many other projects. When you've got a story-based project that requires more attention from your audience to have those aha moments, what's your strategy on gaining awareness?
Bryce, what do you think?
It's a really good question. Obviously, like all entertainment comes down to marketing. And it's the unfortunate beast that prevents connecting with their audiences a lot because it's really hard to do. I think our goal is to consistently deliver a great product, to go everywhere, talk to everyone we can, talk to podcasts. I'm at every single NFT convention in the last year. I've been at all of them, meeting people on the ground, shaking hands, showing people our deck, talking about what this project is and what it can be. And I think getting people within the community excited about it so that when we go to the launch, there's people who are following us who are really watching us closely, who have, a lot of influence over the community. And then I think the next thing, as you said, is just to be original. You kind of have to you have to have a product you believe in, and then you have to continue to believe in it, even while people aren't necessarily, lining up to see it. And that's the really hard part about creative work is that, it looks like these projects have all succeeded overnight, right? You're like, oh my God, how did somebody drop, whatever it is, Azuki out of nowhere? How did they drop Bored Apes out of nowhere? And that's not true, right? They drop these things after weeks and months of, small batch marketing, hand to hand, person to person communication so that you get the word out. And then there's a moment where the tide shifts and everything kind of becomes, call it viral.
Well, in a weird way, it sort of parallels like my career as a storyteller. It's just like it took 8 years for me to become an overnight success as a writer. Like I'm in the trenches eating shit and getting all the bad stuff, all the bad writing out of my system to finally have something that's good enough that breaks through, right? And then you get these opportunities to write for stage, screen, write in prose, write books, like all that sort of stuff. It happens like that. So the thing that I would say that is the parallel with what we've been experiencing here is to build that small but mighty fan base, right? So when people engage with your content, that you can go, you guys want to go down the fucking rabbit hole on Runner? Like I can go all night. You got a question, a follow-up question? I'm like, we've thought about all this for 2 years. We're not winging it. We're like, well, maybe they have a thing that does this. Like we can provide you with concrete answers on how this world and characters and everything is built out. So we're prepared to go deep if you want to go deep. If you want to engage with us, if you want to become a rapid community, runner community, like we're ready for you. We have a lot for you to consume and we're excited to share and engage with you. So to me, like, again, I'm not the expert on this space, but people are people, story is story. Yeah. And I know like you want to go deep, you want to geek out, like we can do that with this. We're not winging it. We're not making it up as we go along. But we're nimble enough to pivot and to change when our community tells us what they're liking, what they're not liking, challenging the story. Giving good notes, you know what I mean? Like the most valuable thing as a storyteller is to have people that challenge your storytelling, and you may not agree with them, but you got to hear them and hear how your people are responding to your story. So, that's my small contribution to the how to build awareness conversation.
Hey, Blaise, did you save your rejection letters?
Well, I mean,
I have so many.
Well, it was, I did let them go. I mean, a lot of them were digital, so it was easy to, they probably still exist, but yeah, and by the way, the rejection never ends, even when you're a working writer. I mean, I just got this project that I thought a major studio, like we were taking, it was a new idea that we were taking around town. We brought to all this, seemed like a slam dunk, great package, huge underlying IP, great adaptation. At least I thought so. And it was like, we're gonna have a bidding war. This is gonna go amazing. And we just got our final pass. Like, it's a bust. It's a bust for all that work and effort. It's a bust. And you know what? That's part of the cost of doing business. Like you kind of, you drive up. And with the one difference here with Web3 is that, like, we're taking it straight to our audience, and that kind of feedback and that back and forth is dynamic and is happening all the time. Like, there isn't the gatekeeper in the traditional sense. And I love Hollywood. Bryce too. Like we love Hollywood. We love like what that affords us. And that's still our world. That's still we operate in. But there's an opportunity here to hey, we're telling the story right now. And the audience, hopefully the audience shows up. Hopefully we're able to take it to all the places that we can imagine, but we're telling it now. It's happening. Like, I
think that's I love it. That's the consistent theme. I mean, that's, it's not easy, but it is direct to your audience, right? It is the creator with the audience in the room. It's not after it's gone through the marketing machine to spit out the ads and the reels and the strategic marketing plan. It's boots on the ground. And this is how you create audiences, how you create community. And that's what we think is the really exciting part to bring it full circle to Web3, is that it's you guys are building a ground up story, ground up with your community, direct involvement, and you're selling it yourselves to the community, which is awesome to see. So any parting thoughts before I go into a couple one fun last question?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
that's my part. I thought it's been really fun talking. So
awesome. Yeah, it's been great having you guys. Appreciate it. Okay,
I got one thing.
Yeah, Barry.
I'm waiting impatiently for the sequel to Bright to come out.
Me too, man.
Fabulous movie. I'm
glad you liked
it. Oh, dude, I thought it was going to be garbage, and I watched it. I'm like, this is amazing, and I waiting impatiently.
Thank you. It's a labor of love for us. There's a whole other podcast built into Will Smith's current standing in Hollywood. We'll save that for another time.
Speaking of pivot,
there you go.
Awesome. So guys, final question for you. Given your background coming from Hollywood, I think you might like this one. So, in your opinion, in say number of months, years, days, and some sort of duration, how long till you think a Web3 born community-based project is electing its members from its DAO to go up and accept a mainstream award like Academy Award or a Golden Globes?
Oh, that's cool. That's a cool idea. I think it's probably like that's a real question, and something that we've been really not concerned about, but I think something we've been really focused on with this, which is that you can create content for the Web3 community, but the Web3 community is 50,000, 100,000 people really who are really active. And in Hollywood, if you're not getting 500,000 viewers a week, you get canceled in a traditional television sense. So it's like, how do you cross the divide between the people that are involved in the project in the Web3 space, which is obviously awesome, but then can you go launch mainstream content from that crucible that goes out and gets 5 million, 10 million, 100 million viewers, and viewers who, by the way, maybe don't even know what NFTs are, maybe aren't even involved in the NFT, but creating a fandom outside of that world, so that would obviously bring back more attention to the NFTs itself, support the NFT community through that sort of notoriety. And at the same time that NFT community is generating so much of these ideas and sort of playtesting these ideas that go out and become mainstream content. And so that's my goal first. We'll talk about awards later. Is to get, how do you get those people that genuinely love it? And then how do you create something that people love even when they are not a holder? And that's something that we've been really focused on as well.
Yeah. And I don't want to, the last thing I want to do is shoot myself in the foot by something I say, although I've been known to. What I would say is, I think, this is going to sound sort of self-serving, but projects like the one that we're building here are built they're in this nimble form right now, living in Web3, living in comics. We can leap to production very quickly because we have the story for it and we have the personnel for it. We've all done it before. We do it all the time. So we can make that jump nimbly. And if it's exceptional content, that path to awards is shorter. But it's also something you cannot control. You know what I mean? And to me, the award litmus is far less important than a rabid fan base, than a real people who are genuinely excited. To me, it's like the stuff, like my favorite movie of all time is Ghostbusters. I've loved it through every age that I've grown, right? The movie has grown with me. I didn't like Peter Venkman. He seemed like a meanie when I was 8, and then he became my favorite character, right? So to me, that's far more important than having a statuette. Not that I wouldn't mind a statuette, but that community and that engagement, that's the thing. Cosplay, like I'll give you an example. Sorry. When Vampires vs. the Bronx came out on Netflix in 2020, we had people show up trick-or-treating at our house in doing cosplay. It wasn't a lot, but like that was greater than any award ever. Like a kid showing up dressed as a character from a movie that we thought was like kind of punk rock and small. I'm like, that was so satisfying. That's the goal for me, is to see the internalization of story and character. And that's ownership. You know what I mean? That's like that proto ownership before Web3, right? Is cosplay. That's your way to kind of remix it and limit it. So that shit gets me so excited.
Somebody, we got turned into our first meme today, and we were all super excited.
Congrats!
You know, you've arrived in Web3 when somebody turns your project into a meme. Awesome. No, love it, guys. I'll tell you one quick. One of our last guests in the podcast that'll air Monday said, forget mainstream awards. Let's make our own. So I think that's an interesting way to think about it as well. To your point, it's a different measurement model when we talk about the passion of the Web3 community and the ground up storytelling. We might need to make our own. So want to thank you both again for coming on. Been an absolutely spectacular show. Love the conversation. Learned a ton. That's our goal here at Story Prima, is to pass on knowledge and promote great projects and great leaders in the space. And you're both that for sure. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, guys.